Battlefield 6 was promised to be a glorious return to the all-out warfare that made Battlefield a one-of-a-kind experience. It was labeled as the ultimate comeback, an evolution of the franchise, and a true next-gen experience. This was supposed to be it, a massive launch with a colossal peak of nearly 750,000 players on Steam alone. But what we are witnessing is a catastrophic collapse that could lead to one of the biggest failures in modern gaming. Just months after its celebrated launch in late 2025, Battlefield 6 is in a freefall. The game is hemorrhaging players, losing an astonishing 85% of its peak audience. Daily player counts have plummeted, and while the game now hovers around 90,000 concurrent players, thousands of fans are walking away. Some are even going back to older Battlefield titles just to find the experience that they were promised. So how did this happen? How did the next great chapter for Battlefield become one of the most disappointing stories heading into the new year? Today, we're breaking down every problem plaguing this game, from its broken technical core to baffling design choices and the content drought that's causing this mass exodus. Before we can even talk about the maps or modes, we have to address the crumbling foundation this whole game was built on. At the heart of Battlefield 6's problems are crippling technical issues, especially the disastrous netcode and hit registration. The most basic promise a first-person shooter can make is simple. When you point your gun at an enemy and pull the trigger, your bullets hit them. But in Battlefield 6, that promise feels fundamentally broken. Since the beta, players have been complaining about inconsistent hit detection, desync, and lag. These aren't just small bugs, they're game-breaking flaws that make firefights feel random and cheap. Forums and social media are flooded with clips of players landing clear shots that just disappear into thin air, doing zero damage. It's especially bad during fast-paced fights or in chaotic zones with tons of explosions and vehicles. The problem seems to be a nasty mix of server-side issues like low tick rates and flawed lag compensation. Essentially, what you see on your screen isn't what the server sees. It leads to those infuriating moments where you feel like you died to a single bullet when on the server you were actually hit multiple times. Even players with powerful PCs and stable low-ping internet connections have reported these problems, which points the finger directly at the game's servers or engine. And while DICE has acknowledged the complaints and released patches, the problems persist. A patch in December was supposed to fix some of these issues, but many players reported that things either didn't improve or in some cases felt even worse. When a huge chunk of your player base feels like every gunfight is a coin toss, you don't just have a bug, you have a crisis of faith in your game's core mechanics. If the technical problems were a crack in the foundation, the game's design was an earthquake that completely shattered it. A common feeling in the community, from veterans to newcomers, is that Battlefield 6 is having a major identity crisis. It often feels less like a true Battlefield game and more like a desperate attempt to copy its competitors, leaving behind the Battlefield DNA that made the series famous. For longtime fans, the biggest betrayal was ditching the classic class system. The rock-paper-scissors dynamic of assault, engineer, support, and recon was the strategic heart of the series. It forced teamwork and made the battlefield readable, but Battlefield 6 threw that out the window by making the roles feel pointless, with, in my opinion, useless class abilities and allowing any gun to be used with any class. This completely broke the formula, leading to chaos where squad roles became meaningless. With no clear visual way to tell the roles apart, you can't identify threats at a glance. Is that an enemy medic or an anti-tank expert? In this game, you often don't know until you're back to the deploy screen. And this identity crisis bleeds into the maps, which have been a huge point of controversy. After criticism that some previous maps were too big and empty, it seems the developers overcorrected. A lot of the maps in Battlefield 6 are criticized for being too small, too simple, and forcing a chaotic pace that feels more like Call of Duty than Battlefield. Players complain about the design that seems to be just a giant clusterfuck with no clear front lines or strategic flow, where you're constantly getting shot from 20 different directions. The large-scale warfare with a focus on vehicles feels like it's being pushed aside for the constant meat grinder shipment-esque gameplay. But a buggy launch with an identity crisis can be forgiven if the developer responds with a steady flow of fixes and new things to do. For a live service game, what happens after launch is just as important as day one. Unfortunately, like many other live service games, Battlefield 6 has failed spectacularly. The pace of new content has been painfully slow, leaving the dwindling player base with very little reason to stick around. In those crucial first few months while players were fighting the game's core flaws, the pipeline for new maps, weapons, and updates were nearly empty. This created a perfect storm. The gameplay was frustrating, and there was nothing new on the horizon to give people hope. The progression system at launch was also called out for being incredibly slow, making the grind for attachments feels like a chore. While DICE did patch this to speed it up, the damage to player morale was already done. The content drought looks even worse when you look at the competition. While not a direct competitor to Battlefield 6, Arc Raiders launched and is now pulling in 5 times as many players by delivering a stable experience and a consistent flow of new content. It proves that players are willing to stick around with a game that respects their time. The hype gets you players on day one, but good content and communication are what makes them stay. Battlefield 6's seasonal model has felt sluggish and just not enough to fix the game's core problems or excite a bored and frustrated audience. And when the developers would rather sell the player-based AI-generated content on the storefront instead of adding meaningful content, then the developers have completely lost the plot. The game launched with the promise of an evolving Battlefield, but for many, it has felt abandoned. Perhaps the most defining failure in this entire saga isn't a bug or a bad design choice, but a breakdown in trust. In the era of live service gaming, communication is everything. When a game is in crisis, players look to the developers for transparency, clarity, and a roadmap to recovery. With Battlefield 6, the community was often met with silence or corporate speak that only made things worse. Acknowledging problems is the first step, but the follow-through is what really matters. When patches are released that fail to fix core issues like hit registration or even make them worse, it sends a clear message to the player base that the developers didn't fully understand what was wrong with their own game. This wasn't just a failure to code, it was a failure to listen. The community provided endless feedback, yet core complaints about content, map flow, and the removal of legacy features went largely unaddressed for months. This lack of response created a vacuum that was quickly filled with frustration and memes. While the developers may have been working hard behind the scenes, the perception was one of neglect. It made the initial marketing promises of a love letter to fans feel hollow and even insulting. For many, this communication gap was the final straw. It's one thing to play a broken game you believe will be fixed, it's another to play a broken game when you feel like no one is listening. The exodus from Battlefield 6 wasn't just about bugs, it was about a complete erosion of faith in the studio's vision and its ability to deliver on it. So when you put it all together, you get the catastrophic collapse of Battlefield 6. Broken technical performance shattered players' trust. Baffling design choices like ditching the class system and poor map design alienated everyone. And a painfully slow live service gave no one a reason to stay. The big question now is, can the franchise recover? DICE has promised fixes and more content, but the mass exodus has done massive damage to the game's reputation. Rebuilding that trust will be an uphill battle, one fought with real, meaningful improvements, not just marketing hype. But if anything, this whole mess is a huge lesson for the AAA industry. You cannot betray your game's identity, neglect its foundation, and disrespect your community and expect to succeed. The soul of a game matters way more than its graphics. But if you made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't already, consider leaving a like and comment below your thoughts on the state of Battlefield 6, and if you think you can recover. I would also appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button for more videos in the future, as well as help start off 2026 in the right path. But thank you guys so much for all the support you show on the channel, I really do appreciate it, but I will see you guys in the next one.